folk singer is dead after she was attacked by a pair of coyotes.
What is the monkey doing? Tell me what's going on.
He ripped your face off!
We actually have a trainer in the water with one of our whales.
If I show weakness, if I retreat, I may be hurt, I may be killed.
Baby Azaria Chamberlain was taken by a dingo back in 1980.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Man. It is the only true crime podcast on the entire fucked up internet where all the killers are real animals. Whether it's biting, scratchings, maulings, or clawings, we are here to talk about it. I am your host, as always, joined by my wonderful co-host, African Drum Circle. How are ya, pal? And joining me on a trial basis, man pretending to be a dog
Morning, I came out into the front yard
with true crime music in the background.
And as soon as they saw me, they came bounding over.
And what do they do? Oh. I don't think it's going to work out, pal. You're a little intense for this kind of show. We try to keep things relatively chill here. Yeah, welcome everybody to a new episode. Good to have you. Lovely to have you, have me in your ear holes. How do I feel? Do I feel big in your ear holes? Am I grating? Am I smooth? I've never known. 5 years of broadcasting and I don't even know what I feel like in your ear hole. I debated whether or not it's worth bringing this up. But I think at the outset, I try to, when possible, not let the show be affected by current world events. But I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the awful terrorist attack that occurred in Australia, in Sydney, not that far from where I live, a couple hours, on about a week ago, almost. Yeah, horrible shit. Real awful stuff. Just, yeah, broke. I don't say this lightly. It broke my heart a little bit seeing that happen. But I think that, like after any event like this, it was an opportunity for us to, examine the worst part of ourselves, but also, see some of the best of ourselves. And there's like two really good examples of the best that I want to talk about because, we're all focused on the negative, but the positives here, obviously, one of the biggest parts of the story are the heroes that stood up to the violence that was happening, many of who unfortunately did die, one of which didn't, but was injured, Ahmed El-Ahmed, the man who tackled a terrorist and took the gun away. Like a badass motherfucker if there ever was one, truly. And just the way that the country has just encircled this man and made him, he made himself the hero, but we're all acknowledging it. And I think the amount of Islamophobia that's come out of this event, it was already pretty bad in this country, Islamophobia, but this really didn't help. One tiny silver lining here, thank God this guy was Muslim, because it's a glimmer of hope that we might be able to push past that and see, that these people are people. Anyway, the other, real lovely thing that's happened is that in the days after, millions of Australians went and donated blood. They've got blood flowing. Well, they've got blood coming out their butts, I'll say that. Not in a fun way like me when I get a hemorrhoid. No, that was just people pulling together to do what they can do. They're talking about tightening the gun laws again. I don't know how I feel about that yet. We already have some very strict gun laws, but hey, this dude had 6 guns and a gun license. And he was ASIO knew who he was, and apparently he's connected to ISIS somehow. So maybe they can be tightened. I don't know. One thing that's not been great, and I know, the broad majority of the people listening are from the US, but God, sorry, you guys don't get to comment on this. You don't get to be judgy with. We've had one mass shooting in 30 years, and you've had how many? The amount of Americans I've seen on the internet just being like, see? It doesn't work. Gleefully celebrating this. They love it when this happens. It's awful. Anyway, yeah, I'm not going to... I could talk about this for a very long time. I've had many big conversations like this at work. But I think we'll leave it there. But yeah, like, let's focus on the good. People like Ahmed El Ahmed, the people donating blood. And yeah, just, keep the victims in your thoughts and prayers if you're into prayers. I'm not personally, but, thoughts. I mean, in my opinion, thoughts and prayers are pretty much the same thing, but maybe for you they're different, so you can do both. All right, let's move on to the meat of the bish today. The story we are tackling, I've been teasing it for a while. We are finally redoing an episode on the Great Emu War, an episode we tackled very early on, I think in the top first 20 episodes we ever did. Great Emu War, back when I really didn't know what the fuck I was talking about or doing. So we're reduxing this episode. Very excited about it. So let's jump right in now to the Great Emu War Redux. Now, look, if you've spent any time online, and I'm guessing that you have, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or your weird cousin Alfred's Facebook feed, look, you might have heard some version of the story we're going to talk about. And it usually goes something like this. Ha 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 ha, Australia, you fuckers. You went to war with a bunch of emus. Ha 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 ha, the emus won. Ha 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 ha, Australians can't beat big birds. But like most internet mythology, the truth behind the story, it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's somehow even a bit more ridiculous. Here's what actually happened. So in 1932, a group of exhausted World War I veterans who were just trying to grow wheat in terrible conditions during a global economic collapse, well, they found themselves overwhelmed by about 20,000 emus who apparently decided that Western Australia was the all-you-can-eat grain buffet. And that's right, the government, in a moment of spectacularly bold logic, said, right, well, big birds, lots of them, they're pests. Who do we send in? Let's send in the army. And let's give them a bunch of machine guns. And that's how Australia ended up with one of the strangest headlines in human history. Military deployed against large, fast, confused birds. But here's the twist that most people don't get. Australia didn't lose a war against emus. There weren't like emu generals, okay? There was no battlefields. There was no like trenches or mustard gas. There was no emu-led coup that nearly overthrew the government. It really wasn't a war. The name is incredibly misleading. It was purely pest control. Now, was this pest control poorly organized? Was it badly understood? And was it very easy to make fun of? Yes, absolutely. But yet underneath these jokes, well, there's a surprisingly human story. A story of struggling farmers, of clumsy government policy, and of environmental ignorance. Also, it's a story of a small group of soldiers stuck in the dusty outback all day trying to shoot birds that simply refuse to stand still. So, today, in this Redux episode, this highly anticipated Redux episode, I'm stripping away all the memes and all the fake storytelling, and I'm going to tell you the true story of the Great Emu War. But don't worry, because there's still plenty of chaos, panic, feathers, political embarrassment, and emus behaving like absolute units. Because if there's one thing you should never underestimate, it's a native bird with long legs, a tiny brain, and absolutely zero regard for your carefully laid plans. So let's hop in the time machine and go back to Australia in the early 1930s. Just like today, it was a continent simmering with heat, hardship, and a kind of collective exhaustion that only comes from living through two back-to-back crises. Firstly, the First World War, the Great War, and secondly, the economic train wreck that we now know as the Great Depression. That's right, Americans, it wasn't just you. We also had the Great Depression here, and it was depressing. The government was scrambling to hold the country together. We were on the verge of crisis. Businesses were collapsing like wet cardboard houses, and one group of people in particular were doing it especially rough, as they always seem to do, returning servicemen. Now, these were the men who'd survived the war. They'd survived Gallipoli. They'd been in the Somme. These were names etched into Australia's national identity. They had seen the worst that the world had to offer, and now they've come back home, they really just want a fresh start. And the government had a solution, a plan called the Soldier Settlement Scheme. And on paper, this plan, it sounds kind of inspirational. Basically, it boiled down to, hey, let's give all of our veterans parcels of land so that they can become farmers. They can build new lives, they can raise families, and they can help grow Australia's agricultural and economic output. Now, this is, or was, a fairly good idea, except there were a few things that stood in the way. It would have been a good idea if the land had been good, if the men had been trained farmers, and if the economy wasn't already collapsing. Instead, the land allocated was in Western Australia's wheat belt, which was remote, harsh, and barely arable. Most of the veterans had absolutely no idea how to farm. Turns out shooting guns at people in the war is not a transferable skill when you need to grow wheat. And also, wheat prices were in absolute freefall. They were dropping so low that in some cases it cost more money to harvest the crop than you could even get selling it. But still, these men tried. There's a little bit of an Australian spirit in this, because what else could they do but try their best? So picture this, right? We've got dozens of ragged, sunburned ex-soldiers living in rough huts or tin sheds. Their days were spent clearing stubborn scrub, digging wells, repairing tools with wire and hope, and breaking their backs trying to coax life back from the unforgiving soil. These people had families relying on them, and they also had pride. They had nothing left in the bank, but by mid-1932, things were already looking incredibly bleak. And then, the worst thing that could have happened happened. The emus arrived. Now, each year, just like clockwork, huge mobs of emus, by the way, that's what you call a collective group of emus, it's a mob. A huge mob of emus migrate from the dry inland regions of Australia towards the coast, looking for food and reliable water. Now, these animals aren't malicious, of course, they're just following their instincts that they've evolved over tens of thousands of years. But 1932 was different. Years of inconsistent rainfall and patchy food supplies pushed the emus into unusually large groups. Instead of travelling in scatterings of 100 or so, they were massing in numbers closer to 20,000. And that's not really a flock, is it? That's more like a feathery apocalypse. And right in their path, well, lay the struggling farms of the wheat belt, farms that were freshly cleared, newly planted, and absolutely bursting with yummy little wheat shoots. So imagine if you're a group of starving emus and you discover a free buffet and the only security system was a knee-high fence made of wire and optimism. By the way, knee-high for us is very different to a knee-high for an emu. They are very tall birds. And that's how they saw these farms, the emus. They saw these farms as miraculous, emu-sized open bars. The farmers, on the other hand, they saw something closer to a biblical plague. So let's talk about the damage that these emus caused, because it was significant. Now, a single emu is like a wrecking machine. They're huge animals. They're like 6 feet tall, and they can run 50 kilometers an hour. They also have claws capable of tearing through metal fences like candy canes. Not candy canes, fairy floss, that's what I mean. Emus are absolute units. They are dangerous animals, absolutely. There's a reason that Australians put emus up there with kangaroos as our national mascots, because they are phenomenal creatures. The problem really wasn't what they were eating, it was what they destroyed. So they trampled crops that they didn't want to eat, they smashed through fences, they broke water troughs meant for other animals, they invited rabbits through the ruined fencing, which was its own disaster in its own right. Rabbits decimate what was left by the emus. Now, one farmer later described watching a mob of 50 emus storm his paddock, quote, like drunken greyhounds, flattening weeks of back-breaking work in mere minutes. Another farmer wrote, we'd wake up and you could hear them before you saw them, legs thumping around in the wheat like a storm that had legs. And you got to remember, guys, these weren't wealthy landowners who could absorb losses. These were returning soldiers who were already hanging by a financial thread. They're already dealing with drought, desperation, and debt. The last thing they needed was a bunch of shithead birds ruining their lives. Every flattened section of wheat was food for their family that was ripped away. Every broken fence was hours of labor that they didn't have time for, and every destroyed crop meant another season of debt that they could not repay. They watched their livelihoods disappear under a tide of feathers. Now, I'm a big conservationist guy. I hate seeing animals killed. I don't like hunting unless when it's absolutely necessary. I do not like culling animals, but occasionally, especially back in the past when things were extremely difficult, human life does have to take priority. And these people, this was a life and death thing. There wasn't really like a bailout system here for these farmers who had their crops destroyed. If they didn't have any money or any food, them and their families would probably die. So it really was a life or death situation. So the farmers did what desperate people do. They went to the government. They wrote letters. They wrote telegrams. They had petitions. They begged their local MPs for assistance. They traveled hundreds of kilometers just to try to speak to someone face to face. Remember, Western Australia is one of the most sparsely populated areas in the world. There's only one major city in the entirety of Western Australia. If you've never looked at Western Australia on a map, picture the continent of Australia and then take, going from west to east, take about conservatively 45% to 50% of the country. That is Western Australia, one of the largest states in the world. There is only one major city with 1 million or more people. It's Perth. The rest of them are quite small over there. So people living in the outback, they really didn't have many people around them. They had to travel quite far. And that takes resources and time and money. So you know it's serious when people are doing that. So they travel hundreds of kilometers to try to speak to someone face to face, and to their surprise, for once, the government actually listened. The Federal Minister of Defence, Sir George Pearce, agreed that the situation was incredibly dire. Which brings us to one of the most Australian government decisions ever recorded in history. Because remember, these were struggling farmers. They need fences, they need funding, they maybe need some organised culling, maybe a bit of agricultural support. But instead, the government's solution was essentially, sounds like you got a tricky one. It's absolutely a pickle. What if we send in the fucking military? That's actually what they said. They didn't mean metaphorically or logistically. They mean literally. Let's bring in soldiers with machine guns. You can almost imagine the meeting here, excuse me, Minister, I've got a report here that farmers are being overrun by fast-running, crop-destroying emus. Oh, yeah, right. That's pretty bad. Yeah, so we need support. Yeah, right, okay. So what can we do? Oh, let me think. Oh, yeah, I know what to do. Got 2 Lewis machine guns here. Yeah, some artillery. Yeah, got a truck. Glenn, that's fucking perfect. And that is how a completely avoidable agricultural crisis turned into one of the most bizarre military adjacent operations in the world. Not because anyone intended to create a war. Let's get that out of the way. It's not a war. It's not because the emus were declaring independence and trying to separate Western Australia from the rest of us, which, by the way, Western Australia still wants to do, but because the government had no better ideas. And emus weren't exactly open to negotiations or signing peace treaties. So we now get to picture this image. It's late 1932. The wheat belt farmers are incredibly exhausted, broke, sunburnt, and surrounded by birds that behave like sentient tumbleweeds with anger issues. The government has heard their cries for help, nodded thoughtfully, and said, "Send in the fucking army." Now, these aren't experts from the Department of Agriculture, not trained wildlife officers. No. They sent soldiers because what you've just come out of as a world war, your first instinct is, just send in Gary with a big fucking gun. So let's meet our war party. Let's meet Gary. Well, his name's not really Gary. I don't know what his first name was. But the major military force that was sent to WA consisted of Major G.P.W. Meredith, who was an artillery officer who probably thought this was a joke when he first read the assignment. He's a major in the army, guys. That's not a low rank. He got this letter and was like, can you go to Western Australia? Oh shit, what's happening? The Japanese are invading or something? Nah, man, we just want you to cull some birds, all right? You can have 2 soldiers with you. They've got some Lewis machine guns, got a couple dozen boxes of ammo, and a truck, which, to be fair, the truck was already struggling before the birds even entered the picture. This wasn't exactly the might of the Australian army, all right? It was more like a group assignment where only 3 kids showed up. Nevertheless, these three brave heroes, they set out into the wheat belt with determination, confidence, and pretty much no understanding of what emus actually were like. Major Meredith later said publicly, "The Emu Command is extraordinarily shrewd." He said that after the operation. Before it, he was pretty optimistic, which is kind of adorable in hindsight. So the soldiers arrive. When the troops rolled into Campion, which was one of the worst hit farming areas, the locals greeted them like heroes. Finally, some relief. Finally, someone to help. Finally, a force capable of pushing back on this feathery enemy. They pointed out the locations of the largest mobs of birds. They described the damage that they'd been dealing with, and they gave the soldiers food, water, and shelter. And the soldiers, for their part, assured everyone that the problem would be dealt with swiftly. After all, we're military-trained men. We have weapons designed for the trenches of Europe. These are just birds. How hard could it possibly be? You can probably hear the comedic music fading in right now. Now, the first engagement. The birds will hold still, right? That's what they thought. The first official attempt at an emu cull took place on November 2nd, 1932. The soldiers found a mob of about 50 emus that were spotted near a dam. Perfect location, good cover, and a clear line of fire. Meredith and his two men crept into position. They set up their guns, and the range was ideal. Finally, they would make a dent in the emu invasion. Meredith signaled, and the soldiers opened fire. And the emus immediately dropped dead. No, I'm just kidding. They ran away. Because why the fuck wouldn't they? Not in a straight line either. These animals they didn't go in a cluster. They just split up in every direction. They scattered like panicked bowling pins. They zigzagged in every possible direction at 50 kilometers an hour. This was like trying to hit dodgeballs that were thrown by God. The Lewis machine guns rattled and spat metal, but the birds were simply too fast and too erratic. By the time the soldiers stopped firing, the dust had settled and the shouting ended. After all was said and done, of this mob of about 50 birds, perhaps maybe a dozen birds were killed. Maybe fewer. The farmers stared. The soldiers stared. Even the emus seemed surprised at the outcome of this. This was not an encouraging start to the cull. So there was a second attempt. They thought, well, okay, just walking up to them and shooting didn't work. Maybe let's try ambushing them. So a few days later, Meredith received intel that a huge mob of about 1,000 emus was moving through a valley. And he thought, man, this is it. This is my chance. The soldiers set up an ambush. They dug in and they waited. And they waited. And they kept waiting. Because what else are they going to do? Have a wank? When the birds finally appeared, it was like watching a river made of feathers and massive, stupid necks. Thousands of long necks bobbing, legs thundering, and heads swiveling with suspicion. Meredith silently gave the order, and another volley of machine gun fire erupted. And this time, success! I'm just kidding. The guns jammed. Mid-volley, with 1,000 emus charging their way through the valley. The soldiers desperately tried to unjam the gun while the birds sprinted by, unharmed, unbothered, probably a little bit offended that they even tried this. And when the gun finally was cleared, the emus, already hundreds of meters away, were scattering into the bush like feathery ghosts. Farmers who had gathered to watch began to realize maybe this quote-unquote war was not going to go as straight as they'd hoped. One farmer was later quoted saying, "It was like the birds knew exactly where to move. Bastards." So, attempt number 3, Operation Truck Gun, let's call it that. After the failures on foot, the soldiers decided that they needed more mobility. If the birds could run, well, they would just chase the birds. A truck was brought in. Now, not the best truck you can think of, but a pretty shitty truck. It was already dealing with its fair number of mechanical issues before today. One soldier climbed into the back of the truck with a Lewis machine gun, and the driver revved the engine. This would surely show the emus who was in charge. Except, unfortunately, in the outback, there's no roads. The terrain was incredibly uneven. The truck shook violently. The gunner couldn't even aim. The driver could barely see with all the dust, and the emus once again outran the entire operation. At one point, the truck hit a bump so hard that the gunner nearly fell out and died. At another point, they chased a bird for so long that their engine overheated. By the end of the day, the 3 soldiers hadn't even hit a single emu. Not a one. Not uno emu. The farmers, well, they were polite, but you could imagine what their voices kind of sounded like. You could hear the hope in their voice deflating like a balloon in slow motion. And here's where it kind of gets a little bit spooky, guys, because apparently the emus began to adapt to this. The soldiers reported that these emus were learning incredibly fast. They'd spotted something quite strange. The birds seemed to be organizing themselves. Smaller flocks acted as distractions, while larger mobs moved in quickly out of range. One particularly large emu, later described as a leader, we're going to call him Obama, because that's a leader. That's a real fucking leader. Obama was seen coordinating escape routes. Now, were these emus actually strategizing? No, they weren't. Emus are birds with brains the size of walnuts. But it did look like strategy to the untrained, frustrated soldiers. Major Meredith famously said, if we had a military... Well, no, he's fancy Australian. If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. That was not meant as a compliment, by the way. So, after all this bullshit, the public finally finds out. Remember, there's no Instagram, there's no TikTok. Things could happen for a while before people started to find out. But eventually, the public does find out because word of the operation hit the newspapers. And the media, well, they pounced on this like hungry cats. Or I guess hungry quolls. That's an Australian kind of cat? Not really. Anyway, within days, headlines started appearing. Soldiers outwitted by emus. Army loses ground to birds. Feathered menace too fast for machine guns. An emu fucked Gary in the bum. No, I'm kidding. I made that last one up. The politicians in Canberra were not exactly happy that this was happening. The whole point here was to help struggling farmers and also to give some soldiers some, shooting practice. Instead, they'd accidentally created one of the funniest newspaper headline sagas of the year. And the worst thing of all, they hadn't even gotten close to solving the problem yet. So, let's take a little moment here and talk about emu biology, behavior, and why this was never going to work out the way that the army wanted it to. So, to understand the Great Emu War, and again, I say the word war with a grimace because it's not a war, to understand this Great Emu event and how it spiraled into a farce, we need to understand the enemy. Because the emus were not just big, dumb birds. Emus are biologically engineered by evolution, well, to make the Australian soldiers look a little bit like clowns. Emus, if you've never seen one, are enormous. They're up to 1.9 meters tall and they can weigh 45 to 55 kilograms. They're built like a cross between a dinosaur, a rugby forward, and a pogo stick. Emus, if you're not aware, are the second largest birds in the world after ostriches. In fact, they're very highly related to ostriches. Ostriches, emus, cassowaries, and kea all exist in that same family of feathered, flightless birds. They are the second largest birds in the world. I believe they lay the second largest eggs as well after the ostrich. They are massive animals, and they have a lot of weapons in their arsenal. They can run 55 kilometers an hour. They can jump fences easily, and they can change direction like on a dime. Their legs are powerful enough to shatter fences, rip up wire, and kick predators into an early retirement. In fact, that is their main way of defense, is kicking. Now, today, there are not that many land predators in Australia that emus need to worry about. But remember, emus have been around for lots and lots of years. I can't tell you how many years, but let's just say millions maybe. They're native animals here, so they used to have to deal with a lot of megafauna, and that's how they got away with it, by kicking with their powerful legs. Now, emus also have another incredible ability that I didn't really know about. Emus can heal incredibly quickly. They have somewhat of a healing factor. Not like Wolverine, to that extent, but they can heal quite fast. Field reports in the Emu War note soldiers that emptied magazines in bird... Let me fucking say that sentence again, Jesus Christ. Field reports in the Emu War note soldiers emptying magazines into a bird only to watch it jog away like it forgot something at the shops. These animals not only could heal quickly, but they could tank a lot of damage. They were incredibly durable. Now, the military assumed that bird plus bullet equals problem solved, let's go home and have a wank. But the emus, well, they're not like little pheasants or pigeons. They're closer to land-bound ostriches with dense plumage that deflects glancing shots, large air sacs that reduce organ hits, and musculature that absorbs impact. In other words, unless a bullet hit you in the brain or the spine and you're an emu, you're going to walk it off. And the soldiers weren't firing precision rifles either. They were lugging the Lewis machine gun, an early and notoriously temperamental machine gun prone to jamming. So, what we have in this situation are birds that are designed to survive severe injury, machine guns that were designed to jam, soldiers trained for trench warfare, and a landscape designed to ruin your morale. And also, we're dealing with migration season, the perfect storm. The entire disaster hinged on bad timing. Every year, emus migrate inland towards water sources after breeding, and in 1932 the rains drew them straight towards the wheat belt of Western Australia, the new farmlands granted to the struggling World War I veterans. The farmers expected moderate wildlife interference. That's always to be expected when you're farming. But what they got was a 20,000 strong feathery tidal wave eating its way through young crops like a biblical plague with big legs. Emus move in small units, usually in families or mobs of about 10 to 20. But during migration, these groups merge into large, loose federations, and that gave the impression of a coordinated army. Farmers truly did believe that the birds were conducting reconnaissance, that they were flanking the troops, and that they were communicating strategy amongst one another. One soldier wrote, quote, "The emus appear to have a highly developed system of military intelligence." Now, really, it wasn't military intelligence. It was barely intelligence at all. It was just natural flocking behavior. But to exhausted diggers meaning the World War I veterans, that's what we call them, because they dug the trenches, just a little military history there for you, they were being outsmarted by poultry, and this started to feel really personal. There's also a reproduction problem here. If you can't win a war, you can't win a war if the enemy can replace troops at a rate that you just can't match. Now, emus can lay up to 11 eggs. The eggs are massive. And male emus raise the chicks. Good boys. They're not deadbeat dads. During nesting season, the males barely eat. They lose up to 20 kilograms, but they become ferociously territorial. So, when the war began, many males were still in protectionist mode. So the soldiers weren't just shooting at birds either. They were shooting at dads who hadn't slept in 2 months and had nothing left to lose. I don't know if you've seen an angry dad before. I have. My dad, when he stepped on my Legos. Not a great thing to go up against. So the Great Emu War, as we've discovered, it wasn't just an ecological mess. It was a political farce that was unfolding in real time. After World War I, Australia resettled returning soldiers onto farmland under the Soldier Settlement Scheme. And on paper, as we've discussed, it was a noble idea. In reality, the land was marginal, poorly irrigated, prone to drought, financially unstable, and had a bunch of emus living on it. The government needed this scheme to look successful, and the settlers really did need these crops to survive. Farmers had begged Canberra for help, and during 1932, the farmers in Campion were desperate. Their wheat had already been devastated by falling prices, by rabbits, droughts, and now 20,000 emus. The Defence Minister, George Pearce, basically said, look, we've got guns, you've got birds, let's solve each other's problems, and sent in the army. But from the moment that the operation began, the journalists really did latch onto it. A government sending in military troops to fight birds? Hey, that's just comedy gold. And the newspapers ran headlines such as, "The Emu War begins, birds outwit bullets," and in a particularly humiliating one for Major Meredith rooted by emus. The public ate it up, and the government had a PR nightmare on its hands. If they backed down, they'd look weak. If they escalated, they'd look ridiculous. So instead, they did the most Australian political move possible. They pretended everything was fine and just went on while everything was on fire. That is absolutely what we do here. So, we know that Major Meredith was sent here to kill these emus. I want you to put yourself in his shoes and just imagine Major Meredith's private hell that he was going through. Major GPW Meredith led this operation. Now, he was a decorated war hero, but nothing in his training prepared him for fighting emus. Behind the scenes, his reports were as bleak as they were hilarious. He wrote in his diaries, "Emus are not an enemy to be trifled with, and if we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, we could face down any army." He really wasn't joking. After all this, he was exhausted, he was embarrassed, and he was increasingly aware that this job would follow him around forever. After catastrophic early failures, the government insisted the operation continue a little bit longer so they could maybe salvage some dignity. The official line? Well, this was a qualified success. What does that even mean? That you failed in a dignified way? The farmers, they knew better. They weren't dumb. The soldiers, who were also farmers, they definitely knew better. And the emus knew better than anyone. Because after all this, there were barely any dead. The war ended, but the consequences rippled through the world for decades. Let's talk about the emu casualty account. Let's just, long story short, say not nearly enough. The military eventually reported that they had killed about 986 emus. 986 emus were killed. Sounds okay, but when you compare it to the 20,000 that they were aiming for, they were a little bit off. That, my friends, is a kill ratio of 1 in 20, or as the public saw it, a humiliating 19 birds escaping for every one bird that was killed. Now, the farmers still continued to lose their entire fields. The wheat crops still collapsed, and the government still refused to address the underlying issues: land sustainability, water shortages, and invasive species. Also, no one questioned, hey, guys, maybe we should give the soldiers land that they can actually grow wheat on. Should we do that? No. The birds rebounded almost immediately, by the way. By the next breeding season, the population had absolutely recovered. The Emu War changed absolutely nothing for them. It was the human side that paid the price. Now, even in the 1930s, biologists and ecologists were furious that this had happened. Biologists told us that emus were native wildlife, that killing them en masse could disrupt ecosystems, and that focusing on population control instead of habitat management, well, it just wouldn't work. Of course, it was the 30s, and at the time doesn't matter. We still ignore scientists, but back then we ignored them even more. They were ignored, of course, because politics loves a big spectacle and hates fucking nerds. After the military pulled out, farmers asked for help again, and again, and again. And eventually the government introduced bounties on the emus, exclusion fencing, and later they introduced culling permits. None of these really solved the problem, by the way, because the real issue went untouched. Settlers were trying to farm marginal land in a place that nature never intended to grow wheat. Now, over time, something strange happened. Australia, well, we embraced the embarrassment. Well, some of us did. I still think this is a really annoying story. The Great Emu War became a meme. It became a comedy staple. It was a metaphor for pointless government policy. And it was a reminder that nature really doesn't care about our human plans. It's now taught in schools. It shows up in video games and movies. There's even musicals and plays about this. There are statues, there are TVs, t-shirts, there's even satirical documentaries. Yeah, okay. If it was a war, if you want to call it that, fine. It was a war. And we lost it, okay? But then we did what we do best. We turned it into a good story. Look, the true lesson of the Great Emu War isn't Australia sucks. You can't even fight a war against birds. How are you going to fight a war against China? That's not really what the story's about. The story is about humans underestimating nature and nature laughing in our faces when we do that. We went to war with an ecosystem, not birds. A military trained for trench warfare tried to apply the same tactics and logic to wildlife management. But ecosystems aren't enemies. They're systems. And the system was telling us, hey, you built fragile farms on fragile land. You've ignored ecological advice from scientists, and you've introduced new food sources to the animals here. You've also disrupted migration patterns by putting fences up, and you militarized a problem that didn't need that military excuse. You just should have put science in there. Emus didn't win by strategy. They just won by existing and being emus. There's a political lesson here too. The lesson being, governments will always avoid admitting mistakes, continue bad policy just to save face, and sometimes send in the army after the birds for PR reasons. The Emu War is a perfect case study in bureaucratic overreaction, public pressure, political stubbornness, and institutional embarrassment. There is a human lesson here, of course, and it's important to remember that the farmers here weren't villains, all right? They weren't desperate veterans. They were desperate veterans abandoned by the system that they fought for. The government's refusal to address structural issues left them with an impossible choice. Now, despite everything, the tragedy, the politics, the ecological harm, the incident remains pretty funny because it does expose an absurd gap between human ambition and natural reality. So the final tally, guys, 20,000 emus, basically all of them surviving. Army casualties, 0. Okay, that's important to note, 0 casualties, but our morale, dignity, and reputation certainly took a hint. So, the result, emus won, Australian Army, I guess 0. You know, it's the only war in history where the losing side shrugged and said, oh yeah, fair enough. And that's why nearly a century later, the Great Emu War remains one of the most uniquely Australian stories ever told. It's tragic, political, ecological, and deeply, profoundly stupid in the best possible way. And that, my friends, is the redux of the Great Emu War. My goodness, what a fun story. Look, people really blow it out of proportion. You know, people who don't know what the story actually is will tell you, Australia went to war with emus. They make it sound like we lost 1,000 men or something. You know, we still got like 1,000 of the birds. Just, an additional 19,000 survived. So that's that's my take on the Great Emu War. Let's not blow it out of proportion, guys. It's not really... It is a great story, I've got to be honest. It's a fantastic story. A little bit of a national embarrassment, but hey, if that's our biggest national embarrassment, it could be so much worse, right? So many other countries have way worse national embarrassments, The US has... I'm not going to say that. Canada has Justin Bieber. That's theirs. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Here's some messages, and we'll be back for the rest of our episode. Go and do a wee. And we are back. Guys, gals, and my non-binary pals, it is time for one of my favorite parts of the show. Do I say it or do you? I can't remember how it works. I introduce it. You're just the listener. You can't actually be on the show at all. Okay, sorry, I forgot. I've only done 150 episodes. It's time for the Scratch of the Day. Tiger King. We all love Tiger King Joe Exotic. Unfortunately, one of his associates has died after an animal attack. Brutal injuries are revealed. This reporting is from realityt.com. Let's hear the story. A laundry list of circumstances led to the death of Ryan Easley. The associate of Joe Exotic, better known as the Tiger King, died following a vicious and disturbing incident in Oklahoma. Ryan had been doing his share of shows with dangerous animals for years before he finally met his demise. The number of injuries he suffered during his incident with a tiger is enough to make you curl your toes and make your jaw drop in horror. There's no way around it. Ryan's death and what he suffered through is simply horrific. TMZ obtained the long list of causes, publishing just 15 of them on their website, which, according to them, wasn't even everything. Amongst the common ones were numerous lacerations, punctures, and hemorrhaging. The Tulsa medical examiner concluded that Ryan suffered blunt force, sharp force, and crushing injuries. He was handling a tiger during a show in September when it suddenly grabbed him around the neck and shoulder before sinking its teeth into him and shaking him. Paramedics and deputies responded to the scene, but he was pronounced dead not long after. Ryan had extensive experience working with animals. His father reportedly worked as a zookeeper who handled elephants. Ryan got an apprenticeship with a tiger trainer after visiting a circus at the age of 21. He opened Growler Pines following the onset of the COVID pandemic. Animal rights groups like PETA claimed that Ryan had gotten tigers from Joe Exotic, among others. They accused Ryan of being violent towards the tigers in 2017. Now, Joe Exotic is currently behind bars after being convicted of a murder-for-hire plot against animal rights activist Carol Baskin. He lashed out at President Donald J. Trump in October for releasing Todd Chrisley and Julie Chrisley before him. Joe has been seeking a presidential pardon. Growler Pines called Ryan's death a painful reminder about the beauty and unpredictability of the natural world. Ryan was 37 years of age. I don't remember Ryan on Tiger King. I've been kind of thinking about giving Tiger King another watch through. Did any of you guys watch Tiger King? I want you to tell me in the comments below this episode. If you're listening on Spotify, you can comment. Tiger King was like a weird, cultural moment. Just lucked out being released during the COVID pandemic. We had nothing else to do but watch this weird hick limp around and swear. Fantastic though. What a great story. Unfortunately for Ryan, I don't remember Ryan being on the show at all. But yeah, he has passed away now. I think in America, and I could be completely wrong about this, although I don't think I am. In America, the qualifications you need to be working with big cats and big animals like this, they're pretty easy to pass. I think in other places, like in Australia, to be a zookeeper, you need like degrees, man. You need to be real qualified to even handle smaller animals that aren't dangerous. Oklahoma has the largest number of exotic animals in the United States. Their laws are extremely lax for some reason. That's why a lot of these, like when you hear about a tiger attack or a leopard attack or even a chimp attack, they a lot of times happen in Oklahoma because the laws there, you can own so many different exotic animals. Maybe I do need to go back and watch Tiger King because they talked about this a lot. Anyway, that's that story done and dusted. Let's talk about a cute little chihuahua right after I disabled my ad blocker. Good Lord. I hate this. God damn it. Just let me read your goddamn article, people. Okay. A chihuahua. Oh. Chihuahua in critical condition after a gruesome animal attack. He's so cute. Guys, meet Rusty. Rusty is a little chihuahua and he's a survivor. He was found in critical condition and was unable to lift his head after a brutal animal attack. The massive gash on his neck was infected with maggots and he was barely clinging on to life. He was rushed to an animal hospital where the medical team determined he needed emergency surgery to survive. Oh my God. Oh, I didn't want to see that. That's, yucky. Despite his heart murmur, they proceeded with surgery to save his life. He survived the surgery, however, he's not out of the woods yet. While his wound was sutured, a severe abdominal hernia was found that will need surgery to repair. Rusty needs your... He's so cute. Rusty needs your support to pull through and get the second chance he deserves. This poor fella has been through a lot, but remains friendly with his caretakers. You can donate today to help him. Oh, I'm going to post the link to this in the bio. Go donate to Rusty. He's so sweet. It doesn't say what animal he was attacked by. I'm going to assume he was attacked by another dog. Poor boy. Okay, all right. Short but sweet one there, gang. Maybe the Man-Eater Nation can rise up and help Rusty out by donating. I'll also donate. There you go. Okay, third story. Quote-unquote bear cat attacks zookeepers at DC's National Zoo. We've never talked about a bear cat before, otherwise known as a binturong. That's pretty sure how you pronounce it, a binturong. Weird-looking animals. This happened in Washington. 2 zookeepers at the Smithsonian's National Zoo were injured Friday morning after being attacked by a bitterong, also known as a bear cat, officials confirmed. According to the zoo, around 10 a.m., 2 members of the staff at the Smithsonian's National Zoo and Conservation Biology were hurt by a 12-year-old bear cat named Lola. A staff member was doing a routine training session with Lola when they were bitten, according to a news release. Another member of the staff tried to help and was also bitten, the zoo said. The pair managed to get the animal back into her enclosure. They were then taken to the hospital out of an abundance of caution, the release said. The National Zoo is home to 2 binturongs, Hank and Lola. Binturongs are tree-dwelling, don't know why I said it like a baby, tree-dwelling mammals native to Southeast Asia and are known for their sharp teeth and claws. The animals are nicknamed bear cats because of their stocky bodies, which is covered in a bouffant of black hair, resembling a bear's robust frame, while their large brown eyes and wily whiskers give them a whimsical cat-like appearance, according to the zoo's news release. However, the zoo points out that neither are related to bears nor cats. Poor Lola. Poor Hank. Well, Hank really wasn't involved. They're interesting looking animals. Google a binturong or bearcat if you can. Really interesting. Hope that those zookeepers make a swift recovery, and I hope Lola manages to keep her anger in check for the next time, because people don't like when animals bite people. They put them down, but not in this case. Okay, next one comes from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Interesting. Okay. Fatal mauling causes animal control changes in Fulton County. Horrific attack reveals weaknesses with Lifeline reporting incidents. County police will now field animal control calls. About a year and a half ago, Donna Nguyen and her, I think that's how you pronounce Nguyen. That's Vietnamese, I believe. Donna Nguyen and her, no, it's Nguyen. No, it's Nguyen. That's how you pronounce it. Nguyen. About a year ago, Donna Nguyen and her fiance moved on to an acre of land at the shore of Dixie Lake No. 1 in Union City. Nguyen was in her early 60s. She'd spent her life in the suburbs of South Atlanta. She had also been using methamphetamine. Well, there's an interesting part of the story. Oh no, I have to pay for the rest of the article? I'm not doing that. Oh God. Fuck that. All right. Scratch that. Never mind. I can't even turn off my ad blocker. It makes me want to pay for... I'm not paying for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Sorry, guys. All right. We'll move on to another story. Professional broadcaster right here. Good. I swear I checked. I swear I looked through to see if I could read it, and it said yes, and then it just went away. That's bullshit. Okay. Anyway, let's move to India. Brace yourself for some place names and people names to be butchered by me. A wild animal attack kills 25 sheep in Kupwara's moor. According to locals of the area, wild animals barged into the shed of Gulham Ahmad Sheikh, son of Abdul Karim Sheikh, a resident of Jahama Mawar, and killed all the sheep housed inside the shed. This is in Kupwara on December 18th. That was yesterday. Good Lord. At least 25 sheep were killed in a wild animal attack in Mawar area north of Kashmir's Kupwara district during the intervening night of Wednesday. According to locals of the area, wild animals barged into the shed of Gulham Ahmad Sheikh, son of Abdul Karim Sheikh, a resident of Jahama Mawar, and killed all the sheep housed inside the shed. An official said that this is not the only incident where wild animals have attacked and killed livestock in the area. In fact, such attacks have witnessed a surge in recent years, he said. The affected farmer has appealed to district administration and MLA Langate Sheikh Khurshid to provide him with compensation so that he can once again buy sheep and earn his livelihood. Locals have voiced concern over the rising frequency of wildlife attacks, which have caused substantial losses to villages across the Mawar area, and which depend on livestock for their livelihood. That's a short but sweet one there, guys. Yeah. I'm just glad that no one, no humans died in that. I think the government is pretty good at, compensating people when this happens. So hopefully that farmer gets his sheep back or gets some new sheep and maybe, gets a stronger door or something. Although I say that very snarkily. Leopards have been known to climb through roofs to attack people and livestock. So, hey, maybe this is just going to happen for as long as you live next door to a jungle. Okay, gang. That is going to be our episode today. Thank you so very much for joining us. You may have listened to the bonus episode last week. Bonus episodes happening on Patreon more and more frequently. So definitely go to patreon.com/maneaters to support the show. I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret. My work situation has changed recently, not entirely all by my own choice. So if you were thinking about maybe financially supporting the show and supporting yours truly, now is a particularly good time to maybe do that because my life is a little bit of a question mark right now. So head on over to patreon.com/maneaters and support the show. If you can, of course. If you can't afford it, I would never expect that of you. But if you got the extra cash to sling about, why not sling it my way? I need it. What else? Do me a favor, guys. Follow the show wherever you listen to it, particularly on Spotify. Been really enjoying seeing all my Spotify analytics. Comment below. I'll ask you a question. Oh, this is an easy one I don't believe I've ever asked. What's your favorite animal, guys? What's your favorite goddamn animal? Tell me that. Yeah, that's basically it. Well, yeah, the Maneaters on Instagram. There's an email. Reach out. Say hi. Love hearing from you. That'll do it for today. Love your faces, guys. Stay safe out there because as we've learned, it's a jungle out there.